All right. Hello, and thank you for coming. I'm Kate, and this is Melissa, and this is Ports of Call, where your ancestors landed. As you're going along in your genealogy research, you will probably eventually get to an immigrant ancestor. And the first place you might look is Ellis Island, because 12 million people came through there starting in 1892. And you should definitely look there. But what if you don't find your ancestor? Well, that's exactly what happened to me when I was looking for my grandfather, and that sort of led me on this quest to find other immigrant ports. And I did eventually find my granddad, and he came in through Philadelphia. So it does turn out that there's a lot of different ports to look at. So let's get started with some general sites, and then we'll take a quick trip around the globe to see where our ancestors may have turned up. All right, let's do some tips and tricks and talk about NARA. Melissa.
All right. So before you get started, it's always best to have a game plan. And Kate and I wanted to come up with some things that to save you guys time and just learn from our lessons, because this definitely was a very challenging presentation put together. So the things that you should do are definitely use Family Search wiki page, use Cindy List ports of entry, and you want to be specific with your research. You want to have one goal, and you want to do one person at a time. You do not want to say, oh, well, I'm going to do all the great grandparents, and I know that they came out of through New York, because that's just going to bog you down. And having that many people at one time is too cumbersome in the research. But it also, if you are too set on what stories you've been told, you're going to wind up missing something. Things that you don't want to do, don't focus on the reasons why, and don't focus on the regions that they left from necessarily. When you do your research, you want to start in the new place that they landed, whether it be Australia or South Africa or the United States. Don't get caught up in histories of things. Obviously, we all love history because we're all doing this, but sometimes getting too wrapped up in all the other aspects of it can really distract you. And don't expect everything to be in English. I know that there's a little typo there, but do not expect everything to be in English. When you're looking for these records, sometimes they're going to be in Spanish. You'll see the little pop-up down at the bottom that's from Ancestry. You want to use the native name and the native spelling, not necessarily having the right character if there's anything above the letter, but you want to make sure that you don't use the English adaptation. You want to use the original one. Are there any questions about some tips and tricks? Okay. All right, and then these are some holdings. We'll start with what they do not have. There's no passenger list for vessels before 1820 within the National Archives. So don't waste your time going there. You're just going to waste, it's a no-go. And then with the only exception is New Orleans with 1813 to 1819, and then Philadelphia from 1800 to 1819. Otherwise, don't look there. Kate went ahead and found some things that they do have, and they have a list of Russians to the United States from, it looks like, probably 1934 to 1997.
Oh,
is that right, Kate?
1834. Sorry.
Oh, 1834. Okay, so 1834 to
I'll change that right now.
Again, not that we want you to get wrapped up in it, but it is, a political upheaval with the revolutions and that. And then the Irish to New York during the famine, Germans to the United States, and then Italians to the United States. And if you do have Italian lineage, don't automatically assume New York. Up until, I think, about the early 2000s, the most concentrated area of Italians in the United States was New Orleans. So I know that a lot of times people, you get caught up in these cliches that, we're all, fed, but New Orleans has a giant Italian population.
And just a reminder that these aren't the actual records, but they are transcriptions, which will give you clues to further research. And you access that through the AAD at the NARA site. Their access to archival databases.
Someone is asking, can you change the presentation to a full slide?
Oh.
So throw it in presentation mode.
There we go.
Is there anything that
Better?
you wanted us to go back and go over that you wanted to take notes on before we go forward? Okay.
Okay.
All right. So then we can just go ahead and move on.
All right. There are general ships passenger list sites, and here we've listed a few of them here. And this is a place to go to start looking for transcriptions of passenger lists. So one of the websites is called the Ships List. The Immigrant Ships Transcriber Guild has a bunch of volunteers who just transcribe passenger lists and put them up for our use, which is great. Thank you very much, Immigrant Ships Transcribers Guild. Also, Olive Tree Genealogy has a bunch of passenger lists as well. And this curious and very unique site that I found, GG Archives, has souvenir passenger lists from 1870 to 1960. So it doesn't have the actual list, but it has a collection which it is digitized of the little booklets that were handed to passengers with the passenger lists on them. And it's just kind of an interesting site historically and artistically, because the cover art on those is quite interesting. All right. And as we said, we definitely would be using Ancestry and Family Search, and Melissa will tell you how to get into Ancestry and how to find the immigration records there.
All right. So right now, Ancestry is available for you to use at home. We encourage you not to go ahead and buy the subscription unless you really want to. You can get it for free through the Barrington Library website. And when you are looking for immigration records, you're going to want to use the card catalog. This is going to be the quickest way to get directly to the area that you want to research and the time period that you want to research. So I gave a little screenshot of all the different things. So when you go into Ancestry, you go to search and you'll find the card catalog in the drop-down menu. From that drop-down menu, you're going to narrow down your area by the country that you're from or that you're looking in, like North America, and then you're going to narrow it down even more into immigration and travel, and then you can do the specific area, which was the United States. Sorry, I should have said continent before. Continent, and then the record, which is immigration, travel, and then the country. And then you'll see down below, it gives you all the different things like passenger list, crew list, border crossing, passports. This is all after it's already been narrowed down with those three selected parameters. In the middle, you can select the time period. If you don't know the time period that they came over, go within an average range of, I would go anytime from the time they were born up until the time that they had a first child in the area, whether it was the United States or Australia. Go look in that whole span, and you can knock it down by decades if you'd like. If you're looking in a specific state because you do know that they came in a certain area, then again, you could filter it down even further by location. But I wouldn't do that to begin with because, like Kate said, and in my case, they did not come through New York. So if you're at all kind of cautious and you're not really sure where they came in, you want to have a broader search and narrow it down rather than saying, oh, well, everyone just came here, Ellis Island, because that's not necessarily the case. And you could be missing your record. All right, if you guys could please mute your microphones. There are some background noises coming in over them. I don't believe maybe Kate can look into it. I'm not familiar with muting everybody. But please go ahead and do that if you are there and you have your sound on.
All right. FamilySearch.org is another big site that you might want to check out and use. It's the Latter-day Saints site, and it has billions of records, and a lot of them are immigration and passenger records. So you would go to FamilySearch.org, and you can search by their catalog as well. And this is what it looks like when you go to the catalog. And I like to search by keyword. And I type what I'm looking for into the search box here, and I hit search. And here's an example of one of my searches. And again, just like in Ancestry, you can limit by year or by category on the left side here. And my sample example was typing in Philadelphia and passenger. As I said, I found out that my grandfather came in through Philadelphia, so I wanted to look at the Philadelphia lists. So I typed in Philadelphia and passenger and got this nice list here. And if you notice on the right side of all these, it says add. And if you click on add, you can make your own catalog list. And this list will be remembered. So when you sign back out and sign back in, it'll still remember what list that you were working with. So you can create your own little catalog of passenger lists. And then you'll have that handy for you next time you're ready to research.
Are there any questions you guys have?
All right, then we are ready to start our trek around the world with Melissa and the colonial times.
Okay, so we did separate the colonial period apart from everything else. We do have a little slide about different acts that came into play. So this is before the Naturalization Act in 1795, I believe it is. It might be 1765. So there were, the main things were New Netherlands, New France, New England, and New Spain. And we do have maps that come up later on that we can show you about. But when you are, yeah, Kate, they're asking for you to please mute. I can't mute, I'm not the host. When you are doing it, if you know that you have colonial records, you're going to want to go ahead and use. Okay, sorry about that. So yes, we do have handouts, and I'm sure that Kate probably included them in there. If it's not, just shoot your email in the chat and we can send it to you. So New England, again, it could be anybody coming through. It doesn't necessarily have to be people from England that were settling in the English colonies. Spain is a little more strict, and with New Spain, again, it's mainly Florida and Texas, St. Augustine, Galveston, those types of areas. But with New Spain, one of the things that's different is that they were small, what do you want, Kate? Small settlements that eventually turned into missions. So they're not really as thorough records as you could find maybe with French fur traders or things, or, you know, Puritan colonists, or even Virginia with the Tidewater area of the Chesapeake Bay. One thing to keep in mind is that there were very few ports in the areas, and there, as you'll see with the maps, you'll find the different spots, but that doesn't mean that other countries weren't using those ports. Again, there may not be records. Not everyone was required to keep captain's ship logs. People were just brought over. You would even want to look for indentured servant lists in the card catalog when you're researching this far back. Are there any questions? Okay, if you do have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat box and we'll try to answer them as quickly as possible. All right, so you'll see over on the left, you have the New Netherlands settlement. Obviously, New York was not always New York. I have a lot of Dutch settlers in the area, but this is just to give you an idea of the different spots. You'll see that it goes up the river, up to Schenectady and things like that. Anything that had an extension could also be considered a port. So it wasn't just your main shipping spots that you think of now, like Miami or Port of Los Angeles or New York. It could have been anything that was on the waterfront. And then also, you want to remember that it's a port of arrival. So it could be anything as far as border crossing as well. Wherever there's a station set up that would process people coming in, if they did process anybody, then there's going to be a port record. So don't just think ship. You'll see over on the bottom, you'll see all of New Spain, the Spanish, or, the large part of the United States. Again, mainly Florida and Texas, but the records are not as good as some of the other areas, like Boston. Boston is a huge immigrant port of arrival. And then the next one is just going to be a map about, okay, there it is. You'll see a general idea, and I know it's a little smushed in that, but if you look, the blue is Upper Louisiana, and that's all of the French settlements, and then New England is the red area, and then you can see the different ports listed there. New Spain is Florida, Texas, and then New Mexico and that over there. But this is just to give you an idea of what the map looked like, because we all kind of have that idea cemented in our head from what we're used to, but it wasn't always like that. It was a very ebb and flow hodgepodge.
Melissa, we had a question about are the Mayflower lists on the previous slide that you had shown, or can we have access to the Mayflower?
The Mayflower lists are not listed on the previous slide I showed, but I can definitely go into the card catalog when Kate starts talking, and I'll shoot the link in there. Another spot to also look at would be the American Ancestors page. That is a very good website for people who have English colonial descent, or ancestors, not descendants, ancestors. All right, and then these are just some key legislation things to remember. If your grandparents or even your parents, swear up and down that someone came in during a particular time, but you're not so sure, these are some things to keep in mind. If you have Chinese ancestry, the Exclusion Act and where they would come through is definitely something that would benefit you and keep you within a correct area of time to look at. So we're not going to spend too much time on that. Okay, and then this is just how Kate and I approached it when we were doing the setup for the United States. The Midwest does have ports. I know, again, this is why we want you guys to kind of reevaluate how you think of it. North Dakota is a port because they have the Canadian border. Minnesota is a port because there is Lake Superior and there's ways to access it. Lake Michigan is also a port with Green Bay and the state of Michigan. I don't think I found anything on Chicago with immigrants, but that's not to say that there isn't. But Wisconsin and Michigan were definitely big areas of immigration as well. Okay, so the big ports on the East Coast were Boston. Boston was a huge port. Even though we have Maine and Philadelphia and Baltimore listed, I would have to check on Appleton, Wisconsin, and I'll do that once I get the other Mayflower question answered when Kate starts talking. Boston was a big one. Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. Even though Rhode Island is listed, a lot of people came through Boston and then disseminated from there. So if you think you do have any ancestors, you're going to want to go ahead, and if you look to the right of the slide, the Atlantic ports arriving and departure passenger list through Ancestry goes from 1820 to 1873 and 1893 to 1959. One of the things that was daunting when we were looking at this presentation, trying to get it together, was I wanted to give people an idea of what ethnic groups were coming where, and it just became too cumbersome because every ethnic group came through every port that we found in here. So you would have to go into the family search wiki, which Kate will talk about again later and bring up, but just assume that your ancestor, whether it be German, Dutch, or Irish, could have very easily come in through New Orleans as they could have through Boston or New York. When I was doing the research again, you have to look at one of the aspects of it was how expensive was it to leave from a specific area, and how expensive was it to go into a particular port. So I think Demetra was asking, or someone else, that I can't remember what the question was, but if they came into a specific area, was it just kind of anybody was let in? And that is the case with New Orleans. New Orleans had very loose rules. They would just, if you could walk off the ship, basically, you could come into the United States. So people knew that, and they avoided Baltimore, New York for New Orleans, and then they just took trains or other transportation to their final destination. And so another key factor when you're looking at any of these states, whether it be the East Coast or the West Coast, just because someone lives in like Philadelphia or Baltimore, don't assume that they came in that area. They could have moved a few times for jobs, or again, with the whole expense factor, was it cheaper to go somewhere else and then travel to the destination location? So keep that in mind. Always be broad and less narrow when you're looking for your passenger list. And again, never start with the passenger list. Always make sure you have different backup data before you do this. Any questions?
I will just say that Atlantic ports arriving and departing passenger crew list, that thing is huge. It covers so many places that we always recommend that you look at Ancestry when you're looking for the smaller ports, especially that database right there.
Okay, Midwestern ports is going to be largely Wisconsin and Michigan, but also Minnesota, whether it be by boat or by just land immigration. And then also North Dakota, again, is an immigrant port. Ohio, because it's on the Great Lakes. There is a book that goes along with some of this, and it's called Lost Passenger Steamships of Lake Michigan. If you have a Midwestern port individual, one of the things that you want to keep in mind is that whether they had relatives or you had a missing spouse, you want to look at any ships that went down in the Great Lakes, because there's still a lot of information. One of the big ships that went down was Lady Elgin in September of 1860, and they lost 300 lives on that passenger ship. And that was a big Irish population within a particular ward of Milwaukee that just all perished. So don't think that every passenger list is going to be one where there's survivors or people actually arrived in their destination. Sometimes ships go down and you lose passengers. Are there any questions about Midwestern ports? I don't want to get too much into North Dakota or like upper Minnesota because Kate's going to talk about people coming in from Canada later on. Okay. Southern ports. Your big one is going to be definitely Galveston and New Orleans. New Orleans has always been very liberal with their rules. When you do this, again, you want to just use the card catalog. I didn't spend too much time on it because there are so many lists, but the ones that Kate did throw up in the slides, like the New Orleans ship passenger list online, or the Louisiana parish, that's always a good one. But as you get past the Naturalization Act and you have more people, again, like Italians or Irish or people from France coming over, you're going to have better records. Are there any questions about Southern ports? And you guys can stop us at any point. We did, Kate threw in the dates in there for us, but at the same time, there's so much data for each specific area that we try to give you guys easily digestible information so you don't get overwhelmed. So feel free to ask questions at any point. Okay. And then your West Coast ports, there's Washington, but a large one was San Francisco. Sometimes the ships would go from Asia over, but a lot of times the passenger ships would also go around the Cape and then back up. And not everyone that, again, came through the East Coast or the South Coast, South Gulf Coast. The West Coast is also a port of entry, especially during World War II. There were a lot of Jewish immigrants that moved to Shanghai and then went from Shanghai to Los Angeles. So if you have Jewish ancestry, maybe your ancestors went from Germany to China, lived there for several years, and then came to the United States. Any questions about any West Coast ports?
I will just mention Angel Island in San Francisco, known as the Ellis Island of the West, where many, many Asian people came through. So that might be worth looking at if you have Asian ancestry.
All right. I think it's all you now.
All right. Let us move on to Europe as we trot around the globe here. With Europe, we find that it's mostly emigration over immigration, in that 60 million people left Europe, as opposed to lots of people moving into Europe. And most of them ended up in the US, Canada, Latin America, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. And many of these people were Italians and Spaniards and Portuguese. And between 1821 and 1890, another 10 million Europeans settled in the United States, and they were mostly Germans, Irish, English, Scandinavians, Scots, and Poles. And other countries also received European immigrants from the 1820s to the early 1930s, including the US, Argentina, Canada, Brazil, Cuba, Chile, Mexico, Colombia, Puerto Rico, Peru, and Paraguay. So there's plenty of places that your European ancestors could have gone other than to the US. So around 1830, give or take, most of the European immigrants were leaving from Bremen and Hamburg. Those are very popular lists to search. And before that, we have ports in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Antwerp, and Le Havre in France. So those are the major ports that you would be looking for. Oddly enough, this database this website that I have down here, surnamesInItaly.com, has a lovely page from multiple countries of immigration and emigration records that you might want to look at. All right. Here we have some major European ports of departure. Let's start off in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Ireland has quite a few records, mostly because so many people left because of the potato famine. So these databases are quite good. Let's take a quick look at one here just to see. Dunbrody Famine Ship Experience and Restaurant. No, the restaurant's closed right now because of COVID, but they have a very nice database here where you can enter a name and you will find transcriptions of Irish immigrants from the potato famine that were heading toward Boston, Baltimore, New Orleans, and Philadelphia. It covers 1846 to 1890. And we can add a name and see what comes up. Oops. No. You were working before. There we are. We have at least one. And you can get a PDF file of the record. And Scottish were another big emigration wave between 1890 and 1960. And another big port, of course, is Liverpool in England and Southampton in England as well. So you might want to look there for your UK and Ireland records. Scandinavian countries, we have Norway, Sweden. Someone had asked about Gothenburg. As I said, Ancestry and Family Search was the only place that I found that had decent records for that. I didn't find anything online. There is a Swedish archives, but I couldn't find immigration records on it. But Norway Heritage is a very nice database to take a look at, but for the years of 1825 to 1873. Norway has a digital archive, which has records on it. And in Copenhagen, the police kept records of immigrants from 1869 to 1908. So you might want to take a look at that. And again, for Finland, Family Search seems to have the best set of records that I could find. Here's that GG Archives that I had mentioned earlier. Major European ports of departure for immigrants from the 1880s through 1954, and they just have a big list from various places here. Here's their Gothenburg records. And again, it's not an actual passenger list per se, but it is kind of neat because it is the actual list that the passengers got when they were on the ship. And it tells you everything you wanted to know about this port as well. So quite a nice history here. Oh, there we go, finally. And here they are. It should load shortly, I would hope. But these are passenger lists by ship, passenger list by line, passenger list by ports of call. And so you can pick a port, and if they have some of the passenger lists, they will be on here, which, like I said, is unfortunately being rather slow this evening. I'd like to show one.
While Kate's trying to get the website to work, are there any questions you guys have about how to use either Family Search's card catalog or Ancestry's card catalog? Okay, if you do have any questions, just go ahead and throw them in the chat. And then if you have your mic turned on at the moment, go ahead, ask your question, and then please turn it back off so everyone can hear Kate and myself going through.
Yeah, you said that we can go through the library to access ancestry.com.
Yes, you would go to balibrary.org, and then you would go to the databases, and you can either hit A, but it's going to be right at the top anyway. You just click on Ancestry, and it will grant you access from home. This is just COVID temporarily. Hopefully they allow people to keep doing this, but we don't have that information. So,
but you say it's temporary though with the COVID situation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The last we heard is March 31st. So you've got about 6 weeks of free searching. At least. And if we're not your home library, you might want to check with your home library and make sure they have Ancestry and that they are offering home access. Because
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, if you are not from the Barrington area with a Barrington area library card, not a reciprocal card, but a Barrington library card, it's not going to let you in because it goes by the correct code that we have.
Okay. Well, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, there they are, finally. Here's the souvenir passenger list from the Kungsholm from 1932. So just a beautiful piece of art, really, on that cover there. And then when you click on it, you should get the names of the passengers in it. As I said, it's being very slow tonight, unfortunately. But they are here, and sometimes this might be the only thing that's available. There's our senior officers and staff and our first class passengers and so forth. So this may be our only hope at on finding someone in our family. But I just thought it was a rather interesting and kind of fun site to use. All right, questions on United Kingdom, Ireland, Scandinavia, anywhere else before we keep going around on our tour? Because next stop, yes.
Oh, I was just going to say, when you're looking for records, if you know the ethnicity of your ancestors, don't be afraid to approach it in that way either. When I was pulling up a bunch of the different card catalog titles, you have things like Scots banished to American plantations from 1560 to 1775. So if you have Scottish ancestry, sometimes just doing a specific parameter search and then typing in something like Scotland or Scottish or Irish. There's the Italian American passenger data file or Dutch immigrants to America. So don't be afraid to also search by the ethnicity of the individual as well.
All right, as we said, the main ports in Germany were Bremen and Hamburg, and there are databases for that in addition to Ancestry and Family Search, although they seem to have the Hamburg ones down pretty well. The one that I found that I liked is DMaus for Bremen passenger lists. We can pop in there real quick. And it's really simple to use. There's a box here. Type in your name, hit enter, and see what happens. And here's all the Hotzes or Hotzens, Hotzens, Hotzers. So it did kind of a keyword search for me. And anything that's highlighted in blue here would be a transcription of the passenger list. And looks like most of them are all to New York, except for this one, which is going to Canada. And here's the passenger list right here. And here's the Hudson that we were looking for highlighted. That's kind of a nice one to use. And this German roots database has a listing of many, 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 many other ports. Baden, Württemberg, Bavaria, Brandenburg, all kinds of places, Mecklenburg. So you might want to take a look at some of these smaller ports in Germany as well. Le Havre in France is another biggie. This one is only in French or Spanish. If you do it in Google, you can come up here and it will try and translate it into English for you, which is nice. But here is where you can search for a passenger and you just start with the name and hit enter, and it pops right up with all the Lawrence that it could find. And you can just click on one and get some more information about it. At least you'll get a place where they came from, where they were going, and so forth. Sometimes it'll help if you have your French, because this is a French record and it is in French. But it is kind of interesting that the website is only in French and Spanish. The Benelux countries, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg are mostly handled by Family Search and Ancestry. I didn't really find a good website or archive for that, although these digital resources for the Netherlands and Belgium, I believe, has quite a good list. Yes, over here along the left side in blue, they have pre-1736 lists and after 1736 lists, and for all these places. So it might be worth a look for a particular place here. And Italy, Genoa was one of the big ports. And CISE, the International Center for Studies on Italian Immigration. Fortunately, you can translate this site into English. That's one little tip that we might give you whenever you're in a foreign site. If you look for the British flag, then you can translate into English. They don't always use the American flag to indicate they're English. So if you click on the British flag, it'll translate it here for you. They've got a number of languages that it could be in. But you can type in your surname here and see what you can find. And here's a list of the Marianos and where they were going to. And again, leaving from Genoa, going to Brazil, Argentina, and so forth. So quite international in scope. And I guess this surnames in Italy website has many, many, many more ports that you can take a look. And again, Spanish ports, German ports, so arrival records, other Italian cities. So it's quite good. Questions on Europe before we depart for Asia? All right. Before we move along, two general sites for immigration that you might want to consider using. BYU is undertaken this Immigrant Ancestors Project, and you can search by name, but you can also search by archive, and that's this whole blue list right over here on the right. And there are lots of foreign archives there for research. So they're trying to if they can't find a passenger list, they're trying to get the naturalization and immigration documents as proof of residency in native countries. So that one might be worth a look-see. And then if you do have ancestors overseas that in Europe that you can't find, this Archives Portal Europe provides access to archives in Europe. So you can type in a country, you can type in what kind of thing you're looking for, a passenger list, for example. It has all different kinds of archives that you can look for. All right, moving to Asia as we trot around the globe here. In the mid 1700s, Catherine the Great said to Germany and those along the Alsace-Lorraine border, so some French, some German, kind of back and forth there, come to Russia and we will give you free land. So they did. So we can see some German and French immigration to Russia. And there are a couple of databases here that you can take a look for your relatives there. And the Odessa 3 file and emigration from Russia, from Germany to Russia. And of course, the British were a big presence in India from 1600 to 1949, and there's multiple databases on that. The Office of India Office of Family History Search has, I think it was 300,000 names in it. It doesn't really have the passenger list, but it does have baptisms, marriages, deaths, and burials in the India office records. And this is the British and European people in India from 1600 to 1949. So you can type in a name here and see what records are available. And quite accidentally, I wasn't looking for Armenia, but I did find an Armenia Immigration Project database. And this is Armenian immigration to 1930. It doesn't say when it started, but it just says to 1930. And this is a really easy one to use. It's basically a large database of reports, and here they all are on the left side here. And you can just click on a report and it will return results to you. You can look for birth records, you can look for birthplace, you can look in the photo gallery, you can look at death records, you can look marriage records, and just about anything you want to look at. But if you keep going down and down and down and down, eventually you will get to, toward the very bottom, is the passenger lists. So you can look by passenger by last name, search ship manifests by last name, and there they all are. There's no work involved on your part at all, other than picking which list you want to look at. And they're just alphabetical by the name. And then if you click on it further, it will give you the information. So where they were born, where they last resided, where they were, who their father was, and whatever information they have. This person was male, single, and a farm laborer, and where they left from, and so forth. And they apparently were going to New Hampshire. So I just found that quite an interesting database and was quite surprised to find it. And again, FamilySearch.org has a lot of this type of information for the Asian continent. Australia and New Zealand has very good records. The National Archives of Australia have digitized a lot of their things. And you can look by name, just generally, for any kind of record. You can look and see if there's a photo. And you can look at passenger arrivals. Let me back in. There we go. We can look at passenger arrivals here. We can type in a family name. We can hit search. And there we go. And if you click on the little digital copy here, you can find the actual record, which is pretty cool. So here is the actual passenger list. Questions on Australia and New Zealand. This New Zealand yesteryears is a book, but in the back there's passenger lists, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's just a digital book, and there they are. You can just page through and look at passenger lists and shipboard diaries and so forth. And there's photos, and it's just a very interesting piece of history here.
One thing that I do want to bring up while Kate's showing you this is don't ever rule out that your ancestors came directly from one place to another. We've had in past presentations, but there's also plenty of examples where someone will reside in London or Australia or Brazil for a number of years and then go to the United States or then go to Canada or even bounce back and forth a few times. And so there may be a couple of different records out there. So always be somewhat cautious, but open-minded enough to say, hey, yes, I know their original port of departure, but I don't necessarily know every place that they've ever been. And then with the names, if you do come up with multiple names that of, you know, your ancestor, but there's like 7 different John Smiths, you want to go ahead and research at least somewhat on all of them to make sure that you've got the correct John Smith. Don't assume like, oh, hey, I found him, and then, you know, it's that cut and dry, because it never is.
True. And yes, we're always amazed that people, even that far back, seem to just go back and forth on ships all the time. So you might find several going one way or the other or back and forth.
And airport records are definitely something that come into play as you come more and more into the current times. You will find those on Ancestry, and I'm sure you'll find them on Family Search.
Yes, it's very true. And of course, for Australia, we know Britain sent a lot of people to Australia in the 1787 to 1850 time period, and Irish came and Prussians came. So, and then between 1850 and 1900, they had the gold rush. So Chinese and then the German winemakers came during that time as well. And then the war period is Australia received some Jewish immigrants, war refugees from Estonia, Latvia, and so forth. And the Brits and the Scots ended up in New Zealand as well. We have arrived at Canada. I know we had some questions about Canada. Again, in the early 1500 to 1700, as Melissa mentioned at the beginning of the program, Britain and France kind of went back and forth between New France and who owned it. But we had some Scots and Germans and Swiss, and the Irish ended up in Newfoundland at this time. And between 1700 and 1800, or at the time of the Revolutionary War, a lot of loyalists who were still loyal to Britain, even after the Revolution, fled to Canada, or at least moved to Canada during that time. So that is also something to look for. 1800 to 1900, again, the Irish potato famine had lots of Irish immigration into Canada. Western and Eastern Europe also came, and so did Scandinavia, Macedonia, Russia, Finland, and China. And there are lists of Quebec and Montreal for 1903 to 1910. And after World War II, Canada received Southern Europeans from Italy, Greece, and Portugal. The great thing about this is the Library and Archives of Canada has wonderful records, and lots of them, as you can see by this quite long list here. So certainly worth checking out the Library and Archives of Canada. They've got passenger lists only by ship, so you can't search by name, unfortunately. But they also have Port of Quebec. They've got immigrants from the Russian Empire, the Quebec-Montreal list. They've got the ocean arrivals from 1919 to 1924. And even more Canada records. These are digitized, but they're on index, so you can't really search by name. But if you have a place where somebody might have ended up coming in through Halifax or Montreal or Quebec City or Vancouver, you can take a look at these passenger lists.
Does that answer your question, Holly? Because I know you
Yeah.
said you had French Canadian places.
Yes.
So it does? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, give some of those a try.
Yeah, I know she was French and she came out of Canada, but our bigger problem is what we found is her and her brothers were orphaned here, and that in the Catholic Church put them in 4 different orphanages. So we're actually trying to search orphanage records to locate them now. But she came out of French Canada, probably Quebec is what we found out.
Yep. So it might be worth looking at those Quebec records. And then, of course, if you haven't already done so, look at Ancestry and Family Searches because they have great Canadian records as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go a little bit further south to Latin America. Again, we've got the early colonial times in the 1500s where people from Spain and Portugal and the enslaved from Africa and came to Latin America, and people from India and China after slavery was abolished. And again, most of your records are in Ancestry there, or Family Search. Between 1850 and 1950, Italians, Spanish, Germany, Portugal have all come to Argentina and Brazil and Uruguay. And there's an interesting database here, SEMWA, and that's immigrants to Argentina from 1800 to 1960. And oddly enough, this Spanish archive has Cuba, Puerto Rico, Mexico, Dominican Republic, and Uruguay. So that might be something to look at too. That would be Spanish coming to those countries. In the 50s, it was more intracontinental migration within Latin America. So a lot of people just moved to Argentina or Venezuela or Brazil or Chile within the continents. But South America was getting Spanish, Italians, Netherlands, Portugal, France, and the UK as well. And if you're looking for records in Panama, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Mexico, you could rely on Ancestry and Family Search for those. And then I did find this Cuba Gen website, which was kind of interesting for Cuban records. And they do have a passenger list database. And you can search it. You can search the ship, and you can search by person. And they're trying to just pull together all Cuban information that they can on this site. All right, and our last stop will be in Africa and South Africa for this evening. South Africa, plenty of records to be found. Africa, not so much. Africa is really hard, no doubt about it. But South Africa, there's quite a few records that you might be able to take a look at. Again, early times, 1657 to 1795, you have the Dutch, Germans, French, and Scandinavians coming to South Africa. This GGSA passenger list from 1850 to 1890 is quite nice. Again, you can just put in a surname and see what you get. Okay, I've got 5 matches for my Larson, and this will tell you where they are going, where they left from, and when. And then if you click on the gray box, you can see where she is on the list. So here's the list of passengers. And we see that Mrs. Benson is a maid. But this one might be an interesting one to take a look at if you're looking in South Africa. Again, Britain big in South Africa between 1795 and 1820, and there's at least a couple databases that you could use to find British settlers in South Africa. And between 1850 and 1950, there's a Jewish population has ended up in South Africa, and this Roots Bank database is good to look in there. And as I said, Africa is very hard, but this AfriGenius website is trying to pull together some of the records. And it's not just passenger lists, it's bunches of different places to look for African ancestry. So they're pulling together census records, death records, archives, slave data, and so forth. So this is everything that they've got so far, which is pretty big database. At least it's a place to start. And again, Ancestry Family Search, you might want to take a look at those.
Kate, did you find any places of departure for Japan or China? Someone is asking. You didn't include them. So was that because there's no good sources, or they just don't, or you can't find anything good online?
Yeah, it's pretty much you can't find that much online. The Chinese immigration to the US and the Chinese, Japanese, and Portuguese manifests would be two sites that you might want to use. And of course, Family Search and Ancestry, which is going to be your best resource. But I think, yeah, I think those two were the only two best ones that I found. I can go back to that slide. Whoops, pardon me, too far. Yes, this Chinese immigration to the US. And you can type in a name. It's kind of plain, but the Berkeley Library has done a tremendous job on Chinese immigration to the US from 1884 to 1944. This is just that part of it where you search the records, but if you search into this whole, there's a whole website, but you can put a name here and it will bring that up. And then the other one is this Chinese, Japanese, and Portuguese manifests. And this is from the state of Hawaii. So they have this. And the Hawaii State Archives is quite a good source. It's quite a nice source. And you can just put in a name and see what happens. And again, they've got Japanese and Portuguese as well. So those are the two best ones that I found. If anybody has one that they know of now, we'll take it. Let us know. All right. If you want to know more, or we didn't happen to hit a country or a state that you were interested in, Family Search has a beginning immigration and emigration page where you can learn about all the records and how to search and search strategies. So you might want to take a look at that. It has the US immigration and emigration records. And internationally, if you go by category, emigration and immigration, this is just a list of all the places. So we've got Huguenots, we've got Brazil, we've got China. Here's a China immigration, emigration you might want to take a look at. Indonesia, England, Ireland, Canada, Argentina, Spain, Wales, France, Germany, Scotland, you name it, it's probably in there. And with the databases that they have are places to look at. So
it's the same with the states as well. So if you want to do research on a particular state and get more background information, you can do that with any of them.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Then we thank you for coming. Here are our email addresses, kmills@balibrary.org and mfiskin@balibrary.org. Please feel free to email us with any further questions. We're happy to help in any way that we can. If you need the handouts, the websites, whatever you need, please don't hesitate to drop us a line, and we'll be happy to work on it with you.